If it's Wednesday, House Republicans gear up to vote on abortion as Republican legislatures and potential presidential candidates get ready to once again dive into the perilous politics of the issue. Plus, NBC News has just learned more classified documents have been found tied to Joe Biden as the Attorney General weighs a potential criminal investigation into the current president. And what caused this morning's crippling system outage that brought air traffic nationwide to a complete standstill? It's a question federal officials are still investigating, even as passengers are now back in the air after yet another travel nightmare. Happy Wednesday. Welcome to Meet the Press Now. A pretty meaty day in the world of politics. I'm Chuck Todd here in Washington, where after a brutal knockdown, drag-out fight over the Speaker's gavel, House Republicans are turning to an issue that has haunted their party politically, nationally and locally, at least in the last 2 years, or at least since the Dobbs decision, and that is abortion. At the behest of the newly sworn-in Republican majority, the House is gearing up to vote on two messaging bills. We call them messaging bills because they have no chance in the Senate. They concern abortion, zero chance of becoming law. So it's really about essentially putting out a press release to say you passed said bill. Nonetheless, just the act of doing it matters to the Republican base, and it's very important to certain conservative power brokers within said GOP base. Let's just say, though, it has some members who do have to win over swing voters, worrying that those messages could come with a cost. Here's South Carolina Republican Nancy Mace. She represents a battleground district in Charleston. In fact, it's a district that's going to get redrawn and probably become more competitive. She's warning her party against these kinds of show votes.
I believe that it's tone deaf at this point because it's never going to pass the Senate. It's never going to get to the president's desk to be signed into law. We're only paying lip service to the pro-life movement. We have been tone deaf on this issue since the time that Roe was overturned. We buried our heads in the sand. We didn't have any policy alternatives. We were not compassionate to both sides of the aisle on this argument.
Look, the electoral potency of the abortion issue is not showing any signs of letting up. In fact, there was a special election last night in the state of Virginia, Virginia Beach specifically, and the Democrat, Aaron Rouse, narrowly edged out Republican Kevin Adams in a key race to fill a state Senate seat that was being vacated by the newly elected member of Congress from the Virginia Beach area, Republican Jen Kiggans. It was her seat, so it was a Republican-held seat, and it flipped on the issue of abortion because Rouse put abortion front and center in his campaign. He told Semaphore before the election, quote, "We're one vote away from an abortion ban in our Commonwealth," referring to the Virginia State Senate. That makes this race even more important. In fact, this race is playing out as Virginia's Republican governor, Glenn Youngkin, himself a potential 2024 presidential hopeful, added a 15-week abortion ban to the state's budget. He'd like to see if he can get that passed. It's likely to be a huge issue in Virginia's midterms, which are in November of this year. This all comes despite voters making it pretty clear in the 2022 midterms where they stand on the issue in the wake of the Supreme Court Dobbs decision. In our nationwide exit poll, a majority of voters, strong majority, said abortion should be legal in all or most cases. Only 36% said it should be illegal in most or all cases. And at the ballot box itself, 6 states held statewide referenda concerning abortion. In every single state, the abortion access side, those advocating for more access, not less, came out on top. And take a look at the map. Those aren't all blue states, folks. Kansas, Kentucky, Montana. You can write off Vermont and California that way, but you can't write off Michigan, Kentucky, Kansas, Montana. You know where voters stand on this issue, and so do Republicans. At least we think they do. All right, let's check in with Ryan Nobles. He has the latest on Capitol Hill for us ahead of these House votes. So, Ryan, these are obviously messaging votes. Are they going to do multiple votes? What are they hoping to accomplish here? Because it doesn't look like they're going to be speaking with a unified Republican voice.
They aren't, Chuck. There are some Republicans that are concerned that the House of Representatives have decided to take this path, but we should point out that it's a small number of Republicans, and there's only a 4-seat majority right now for Republicans in the House, and there's no reason to think that these bills are not going to pass, at least out of this chamber, because this is still a very popular issue with the Republican base, and particularly in the House of Representatives, many of these members are speaking to their base. These elections are won and lost during the primary season, which is why you see many of these members of the House making this one of the central issues as they move forward. The bigger question, and one that you rightly point out, is how it impacts them on a much bigger level, not only in presidential elections, but in general elections in these key swing states that ultimately control or will decide the control of both the House and the Senate. And right now, there are many Republicans concerned that why would you put a bill like this on the floor that has no hope of ever becoming law and in reality doesn't really change the conversation all that much, except for allowing Democrats to fundraise off it. So this is a debate within the Republican Party, but Chuck, at this point, it seems to be something they're willing to do.
Ryan, I know it's cold, but I hope you could stick around because in that building, they're asking for votes, and I have a member of Congress that I'd like to get to that he's got to vote. So let me bring in Colorado Republican Congressman Ken Buck from the Fort Collins-Greeley area, if I'm not mistaken. I think that's the district you've been representing over the years. It's good to see you, and I know you got to go vote. So let me ask you about this issue here on voting on a bill that has no chance of passing and becoming law. Why do it?
Well, I'll tell you why I feel so strongly about it. One of our pregnancy resource centers in Longmont, which is was in the district, recently drawn out of the district, but was burned down last year after the Dobbs decision. We need to make sure that we condemn political violence on every side. We need to protect pregnancy resource centers. We need to protect abortion clinics. We can't allow violence to be injected into the policy debate. And so I feel really strongly that the bill concerning protecting all issues, all sides of the abortion issue is considered.
I understand that. How about on the specific issue of abortion itself? Why vote on that bill?
On protecting pregnancy resource centers as well as abortion clinics?
No, I mean, in general, why bring this up now if you don't think it can pass?
Well, I don't know that it can't pass, and I think the senators will be able to talk about it when it gets over there. They take a lot of naps. They do a lot of other things that we don't do on the House side. We'll pass a lot more bills on the House side. But this isn't the abortion issue isn't what is the central piece of this. The central piece of this is protecting those who are involved in providing medical services to pregnant women.
Do you think there needs to be a federal legislation on deciding when abortion is legal or not?
No, I think that should be up to the state legislatures to decide when abortion is legal or not, and I think that's what the Supreme Court said.
And are you comfortable with that? State of Colorado clearly is a state that is, on social issues, pretty libertarian. Not necessarily on all fiscal issues, but on social issues, pretty libertarian. Are you comfortable with where the state's law is?
Well, I'm not comfortable with where the state law is. I'm a pro-life candidate and a pro-life congressperson, and so I think that Colorado has gone too far. But I do think that Colorado has made that decision. The Colorado voters have elected a Democrat House, a Democrat Senate, and a Democrat governor, and they have made the decision to be one of the most liberal on abortion in the country.
And you don't think Congress should essentially overrule that decision by Colorado voters?
No, I don't think that at all. I think the Supreme Court was absolutely right. This is a decision that has been left to the states in the past and should be left to the states in the future.
Would you go so far as to vote against any attempt that did try to codify abortion federally, no matter what the number of weeks was?
If it's just a strictly weak issue, yes. I think there are issues like born alive, where we have to make sure we are protecting human life after birth. But I think if it is just an issue that's dealing with the number of weeks before an abortion can occur, absolutely, I think that should be left up to the states.
And where are you on so-called personhood? Is that something basically giving constitutional rights to a fetus?
Yeah, again, I think that is a state issue. It's not a federal issue, and it shouldn't be an issue that Congress takes up. I do feel very strongly personally about that, but it's not something that Congress should be legislating on.
What do you say to Nancy Mace and a few other of your colleagues who are worried that this politically is just going to make the party look out of touch?
You know, I think that Republicans have been identified with a pro-life brand, and I think that a lot of the candidates who lost recently blamed abortion. I think a lot of politics is local, and I wouldn't blame that national issue. But Nancy knows her district much better than I do.
It's intriguing to me. I want to ask you about some tech issues because you've been at the forefront of this. And I think if there are some bipartisan things to be done, it's in this area of antitrust and tech. You boycott Google. Can you explain why you do? And then I want to ask you about some antitrust legislation.
Yeah, I boycott a lot of products that I don't believe are morally correct, and Google is one of those products. I think there's a lot of alternatives to Google. I think what they do is they suppress speech. I have witnessed it on the conservative side. I have no doubt that they suppress speech on the liberal side also. I think that they are a monopoly that is acting to try to crush the competition in the marketplace.
What would a law look like that could demonopolize Google?
So Google controls the buy side of online ads, the sell side of online ads, and they bought ad tech, the
right.
company that decides that. And so they control the whole spectrum. I think what they should be allowed to do is be involved in one of the three sides, but not all three.
So this is a case where you believe you'd like to see the federal government break Google up. This is is this similar? I mean, you and I are of a certain age. We remember when AT&T got broken up because they were a monopoly. And essentially it was the government that said, you can't control all of it. Not long distance, not local, not the actual phone itself. Is that what we're looking at here?
Well, I think in some areas, breaking up Google, breaking up Facebook and Instagram, breaking up some of those companies makes sense. The actual search engine itself, I think we just need to make sure that we don't allow them to discriminate, and so that competition can be created, particularly on the search engine side.
Let me ask you this. Do you think you need legislation, or should this be something the FTC can already do?
I think the FTC can do it if the courts would interpret the consumer welfare standard in a slightly different way. We have a new e-commerce and social media economy, and the courts have really been interpreting the consumer welfare standard as it applies to the old economy. So I think the courts are hearing what we're saying in Congress, hearing what the public is saying. It's time for a new consumer welfare standard, but Congress, under Article 1, should be legislating, not the courts, and we should take that action.
Congressman Buck, I got to let you go for vote. I really want to delve more into tech. I look forward to doing that with you down the road.
Thanks
for coming
Chuck.
on.
I look forward to it, too.
Oh, you got it. Let me bring back in Ryan Nobles there again. Ryan, I had to cut you off because Congressman's got to vote, right?
I do not have to vote, Chuck.
Yes.
You're lucky there. Yeah.
So
no one needs my vote for this.
I
Yes.
hope you heard a part of the interview. He really wanted to parse the difference. Well, we're not legislating abortion access. This is just about that. That's not what Nancy Mace thinks.
Yeah, I mean, that made me scratch my head a little bit because, the Born Alive Protection Act, or I don't know the exact words that they're using. I mean, that is specifically restricting abortion access on some level. You can debate the merits of just how much restriction is involved in it, but by its very nature, that is what it is attempting to do. So, Congressman Buck's argument is that it should be left up to the states. This is the direct opposite of that. This is the federal government telling states how they should regulate abortion access on some level. So, and I think that's where you've seen Republicans try and twist themselves in knots, when they've, raised, when they've applauded the Dobbs decision, right. They've said it's a states' rights issues. It goes back to the states, but then you have others saying that it opens a door to a federal ban. So this is something that they're going to continue to wrestle with here over the next 2 years while they have the majority in the House, for sure.
And I certainly think because state legislatures are all convening this year, and we know they're all going to be dealing with this. But let me look at this from the other side. When the Democrats took control in the first month of the House, they voted on a lot of things that weren't going to become law, too, because they wanted their base to see, hey, you asked us to do this, we're going to do this. Is it possible that we see this vote today and we don't see them touch abortion again, this Congress?
Oh, yeah, I think that's very possible. I mean, there is the possibility that individual members submit pieces of legislation that never see the light of day.
Right.
But I do think to a certain extent this was leadership trying to get this on the docket and then get it off the table as early as possible so that they can get it as far away from the next round of voting as possible.
That's exactly what I thought this looked like, and I'm glad you framed it that way, Mr. Nobles. Ryan Nobles on Capitol Hill for us. I could keep you around and talk Virginia politics, too, given your previous life, but I've got to go to break.
That's right.
Ryan Noble's on the beat on Capitol Hill for us. Ryan, thank you. Coming up, we got some breaking news on President Biden's classified document saga. They found more classified papers. They were discovered in a separate location from the original batch. We have the latest on that and what it means for Merrick Garland's looming decision on whether to officially launch a criminal investigation into President Biden. That's next. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. We are following some breaking news. NBC News has learned from a person familiar with the investigation that aides to President Biden have now found a second batch of classified documents at a new location. This, of course, comes just 2 days after we first learned that the Justice Department was reviewing classified documents found in an office space Biden used after the Obama administration ended. Those documents were found in November, just a few days before the midterms. White House did not return a request for comment, but President Biden told reporters yesterday in Mexico City that he was surprised when he first learned about the classified documents found at his old D.C. office.
I was briefed about this discovery and surprised to learn that there were any government records that were taken there to that office. But I don't know what's in the documents. My lawyers have not suggested I ask what documents they were. I've turned over the boxes. They've turned over the boxes to the archives, and we're cooperating fully with the review, and which I hope will be finished soon, and there'll be more detail at that time.
Let me turn to our Justice and Intelligence correspondent, Ken Delaney, and he just broke this story. He joins me now from the Justice Department. And then we've got Harry Littman with us. He's a former U.S. attorney and former deputy assistant attorney general during the Clinton years, now a legal columnist for the L.A. Times, and knows the type of precarious politics sometimes that the top of a Justice Department has to deal with. But let me start with you, Ken. They found more docs. Is this the Biden administration being more forthcoming, or were they found by a third party?
Our understanding, Chuck, and there's some holes in what we know about this, obviously, and this is reporting with our colleagues Carol Lee and Mike Memley, is that after this discovery in November of the classified documents at the Penn Biden Center, the Biden team, private aides and lawyers for President Biden, started conducting a thorough search of every possible location to make sure there weren't other classified documents hanging out there that were packed after the end of the Obama administration. And what we're told is that they found at least one additional batch of classified documents. Now, this doesn't really speak to the question of why this happened, how this happened, whether there was any nefarious intent, whether there's a criminal investigation that's merited here. But it does sort of broaden the headache, I think, that this story is going to create for the Biden administration, because at the very least, it suggests a sloppy process where classified documents got to places they shouldn't have been at the end of the Obama administration, and we're only now learning about it.
Well, in the case of former President Trump, the archives knew what it was missing. It sounds like in the case of President Biden, nobody knew these were there until someone found them. Is this an indictment on, and I say indictment, that's the wrong word to use here because that's an official, I don't want to get conflate with official legal jargon here, but does that say more about the process of how we track classified documents, or is that something that is on Joe Biden and his team?
Chuck, I think you're absolutely on to something here. We've been talking about this internally in the newsroom. Clearly, you have a broken system here. And I'm sure this is not the first time that this has happened at a White House. It's just that in the wake of the Trump mess, which is like of a different order of magnitude, there's just more attention paid to this, more scrutiny. People have to handle it more carefully. That there's obviously, what I've been told by former White House officials is essentially when you're packing your boxes at the end of an administration, there's something of an honor system in effect here. They're trusting the people with the clearances to make sure that the documents get back to where they're supposed to be. Now, it's a little different when we're talking about, and we don't know the classification level on these documents. If we're talking about,
do we know the subject matter?
No, we don't.
Okay.
If we're talking about TSSCI, which is some of the highest classification super secret intel documents, generally there's a pretty good system for policing those documents, and it would be shocking, actually, if some of those ended up in a closet somewhere and nobody knew they were even missing. That would be a real indictment. It's not clear that that's the case here, but what is clear is that there's a system that's in a bit of disarray here if classified documents can go missing and no one knows they're missing until years later.
It seemed like the archives knew what Trump had but they didn't know what Biden had.
And I think that I would chalk that up to the volume of documents that Donald Trump took, or people around him took, some at least 300 classified documents that we know of, and also the fact that he was the president.
Yeah.
And, you know, there's a system for logging presidential records, and it wasn't just classified documents. He had other presidential records that weren't classified. And in the case of former President Biden, he was former vice president at the time, we knew that he took his intel briefing on an iPad. So it's puzzling, actually, why he even would have had these documents on paper, and why the National Archives didn't know they were missing.
All right, Ken, I will let you go. Let me bring in Harry Littman here. And Harry, you former U.S. attorney. More importantly, you've been on the leadership side of the Justice Department, where you got to make these decisions, and these are tough calls at this point. What is your understanding, or what do you believe the Attorney General is pondering right now?
I think what he's done, Chuck, is quite routine. When the archives informed him, he pretty much automatically turned it over to a Trump U.S. attorney to look at. Now, as Ken was just laying out, there are maybe policy issues here, political headaches, but his immediate question is, do I appoint a special counsel? And I think the answer is pretty clear, and it's no, because he would first have to determine, he plays it by the book, and the book says he must first determine a criminal investigation is warranted. And whatever the worries about sloppiness or how this happened, there's literally zero evidence to date that Biden even was aware of that this happened. It seems like it's probably aides who packed them away, not him personally. So a really stark contrast, sort of soup to nuts, with Trump, who both participated in the initial shepherding and then, of course, was the orchestrator, so alleged, of a ongoing cover-up. So really, legally, the question of a criminal investigation or the appointment of a special counsel, it really ought to just wither on the vine, and pretty quickly once he hears from the U.S. attorney in Chicago.
You're not supposed to worry about other investigations. Everything is supposed to be blinders, right? One does not impact the other. But we're all human beings. I think about the Janet Reno Justice Department, and I guess in hindsight you could say, when in doubt, she appointed a special counsel. I think about Henry Cisneros. I think about, like, it wasn't just Whitewater, right? Everybody got a special counsel. And I know that nobody in the Justice Department wants to go back to those days. But is that literally, put it this way, would Janet Reno's Justice Department already have appointed a special counsel?
Maybe, because she was operating under a different legal regime. As you say, people then had misgivings about it. There was a whole plethora of special counsels, and that's why they passed this regulation, which ironically hasn't necessarily done the job in the Trump years, because all the power resides in the Attorney General. But I think Garland, first and foremost, is a person of the law, and the law says he's got to determine a criminal investigation is warranted. He'll take the advice of the U.S. attorney in Chicago, but I think there's literally zero basis. On the other hand, does it increase the sort of temperature, the politics? Would Reno or other figure be saying, we've got to separate ourselves completely from the White House? Yeah, but now we have this standard. And as I say, why were they there? Funky, we don't know, and it's a problem. Why didn't they tell us immediately? I think they'll say because it was in the DOJ bailiwick. But criminal investigation or special counsel warranted, nothing there. You need intent, and here there doesn't even seem to be knowledge.
I was just going to say, intent is the only thing. What if somebody else misused those classified documents? Not Joe Biden, but somebody else, because they knew they were there. Does that at all hit him, and does that at all trigger a criminal investigation in your mind?
So now we're in the second part. He decides a criminal investigation is warranted, and it ought to be in the facts you just gave, Chuck, but it wouldn't require a special counsel, I think, if some former staffer to the vice president did this sort of 8 years ago, because there wouldn't be a conflict. The DOJ could handle it. I just got to say, when Biden, said at the end of his very carefully prepared remarks,
he was reading the remarks,
looking down at the paper.
Yeah, he read that.
I hope this will end quickly.
Yeah.
I think he has the sense that the U.S. attorney in Chicago has told or is going to tell Garland, Criminal-wise, Mr. Attorney General, nothing here. Lots of other headaches, policy issues, and no doubt we've already hearing screaming from Josh Hawley, others in the House, but not a crime.
And it probably doesn't mean we won't, this will be the last we hear of it, because the House Republicans may do something about it on Capitol Hill.
100%.
Yeah, so it may go away in justice, but it may not go away there. Harry Littman, really appreciate you bringing your experience and expertise to this. Thank you. Good to see you. Up next, a batch of New York Republicans are already calling on George Santos to resign for lying his way to Congress. But the embattled lawmaker is digging in, and Kevin McCarthy's supporting that decision, sort of. We'll have the latest fallout and reaction, and the panel is next. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. Time for an update on the saga of embattled freshman congressman and the talented Mr. Santos, George Santos. Earlier today, the Nassau County, Long Island Republican Party officially called on Congressman Santos to resign his seat immediately, with the county GOP chair telling reporters that Santos' campaign was, quote, a campaign of deceit, lies, and fabrication. That sentiment was then echoed by the head of the New York State Republican Party. Santos' House colleague, Long Island Congressman Anthony D'Esposito, is also calling on him to resign. Now, Santos told reporters today he will not step down, and House Speaker Kevin McCarthy doesn't seem ready, or I guess eager, depending on how you want it, to force him out either. Here's what McCarthy had to say to my colleague Garrett Haake earlier this afternoon.
The voters elected him to serve. If there is a concern and he has to go through the ethics, we'll let him move through that. But right now, the voters have a voice in the decisions, not where people pick and choose based upon what somebody's press has. So he will continue to serve.
So, doing a bit of math here, it's easy to see why McCarthy perhaps needs Santos to stick around for a bit. If Santos is gone, that's one less Republican, and the party's razor-thin 5-seat House majority. And in a special election, could that seat easily flip to the Democrats? It's a 50-50 seat, so of course it could. So joining me now on set, national political correspondent Meredith McGraw, Washington Post columnist and NBC News political analyst Eugene Robinson, and Republican strategist Matt Gorman. Meredith, it was interesting to see the New York Republican contingent decide to basically pile on, see if they could pressure him to do so, and McCarthy being a bit hands-off, though I get his rationale. Like, hey, we got to let the process work, which is go to the ethics committee and let's see what happens.
It was pretty remarkable to watch that Nassau County GOP meeting today. One after the other, they all came out and piled on against George Santos. And, you know, it's in some ways it's easy to understand why. They want to keep the trust of voters there in the 3rd District of New York that flipped from a Democrat to a Republican.
All of Nassau County. This has been, look, Republicans had been taking it on the chin in Long Island for about a decade, and they're starting to make some ground back up.
Exactly. And then George Santos comes in, and his whole resume is a fabrication. So it's an exercise in trust building for them, but you know, for Kevin McCarthy, him letting the process play out, I think it's going to be a little bit tricky.
You know, Matt, one of the more honorable things I can remember in my lifetime in politics was when Phil Gramm switched parties, resigned his seat, and ran as the other party in the special election. It seems to me if George Santos has any hope of ever having a political career, that hit the best course of action, resign and run again.
The motives here are very different. To your point, Nassau, they want to save that seat. I don't blame McCarthy, right? Like, I've been through special elections. That's a crapshoot. And you don't want a 3-seat majority, right? And again, also, you don't have Lee Zeldin at the top of the ballot to maybe rise everyone's kind of boat, so to speak. Yeah. So I wouldn't be surprised. It reminds me a little of David Rivera in 2010, at least politically. Yeah. I wouldn't be surprised if behind the scenes are like, hey, maybe don't run again. Let's see.
David Rivera was a South Florida congressman, got caught in some stuff, and by the way, has got more trouble.
Yeah, no, not legally, just saying politically.
Yeah. Okay, but what if he gets indicted? What if these...
See, that's what I'm wondering.
Exactly. Yeah. That, I mean, I think that...
Don't you think that's what these Long Island Republicans were thinking about? We better get ahead of this.
Exactly. They wanted to get ahead of it.
Yeah.
I think McCarthy wants to let it play out because obviously it's to his advantage to have the vote. But if he gets to that point, I think it's a different story for him.
No, and this gets at the whole, when you have this narrow of a majority, every one of these things seems bigger, right? It seems. I want to go to this classified document situation. Gene, let me start with you. They're totally different, and yet it feels as if, and yet, right? And yet it feels like whatever whatever momentum there was to indict Trump, politically feels as if the air was let out of the balloon. Does it
politically, it certainly does change things. I mean, it doesn't necessarily change things legally. We're still finding out about the Biden documents, right? I mean, you know, this news today that there are some other documents. We don't know if it's
at this
two.
Point,
we don't know. We don't.
Now, in hindsight, I hope they scrubbed every place he's ever lived in the last 6 years.
Exactly, and certainly, and they should, and I'm sure they will. And so let's assume it was all inadvertent and this and that. If you decide that clearly there was no intent here. Now, what President Trump did was very different, right? And they tried to get these documents back, and they eventually had to go in and take them because he wouldn't give them back. That's different, but it certainly does change the calculus, I think, politically, or at least the atmosphere politically about if you're going to prosecute Trump for what he could argue, perhaps wrongly, was carelessness. Right. And it's your Justice Department doing it, and you're not being prosecuted. You know, that's politically not a great thing for you.
So, Matt, it seems as if now House Republicans have to be on the side of this is no big deal, just like we told you this was no big deal.
I think it's
right.
I think this muddies the water, but I think one person we haven't mentioned, if you guys remember, President Trump is running. Apparently, sometimes people forget. You know, it's a little quiet.
I think there's some Republicans that would like to forget.
But look, this is going to muddy the water for him too. I mean, he loves playing the martyr. He's going to say, "Look, they went after me. They raided my office, and then they didn't do anything for President Biden." Right. This is going to help him kind of get back off his back foot a little.
Anytime he can find a moment where he can claim victimhood is good politics. He thinks is good politics for him.
Worked how many times with Hillary? How many times?
Yeah. Meredith, I mean, the White House has to be, this feels like one of those unforced errors.
Unforced errors. But, you know, at the same time, with Trump, that was a year-long process, you know, with the archives going after him. And
it's not nearly the same. There's really nothing here except this is how Trump gets away with stuff all the time, is he's able to point to something that looks kind of vaguely similar and say, see?
We've seen this story before.
Right, we really have. Let me talk about my favorite politics story of the day, and that is California Senate. It is one of these races that I think people haven't fully appreciated. I think there's going to be double-digit candidates in this race. Probably. Because in 1992, Gene, Barbara Boxer and Dianne Feinstein were both elected to the United States Senate. Yeah. It took 24 years before one of them decided not to seek re-election.
Exactly.
So let's do the math. Alex Padilla got in 2017. In 24 years, we're looking at the 2042 cycle?
Exactly.
Okay? This is the last Senate train from California for a couple of decades.
Does not happen very often, right? And so
Katie Porter, Barbara Lee is the latest today.
Every, prominent, ambitious California Democrat you could think about is got to be thinking about, this is my shot. This is my shot at the Senate. And so when we have Katie Porter and Barbara Lee is now apparently talking about running, and they won't be the last.
No, Ro Khanna, Adam Schiff.
Exactly.
I'm waiting for Arnold to say that he'll run as an independent. I mean, there's all sorts of. Matt, you were at the NRCC back in the day. I think about both Michigan Senate and California Senate right now. The most interested candidates on the Democratic side are all House seats, some of them vulnerable ones. And even on the Michigan side, it's John James, who I think Sean Hannity was on TV last night going, you should stay in the House. So the competition between the House committees and the Senate committees for Senate candidates.
Oh, it's always like that. We're like NRCC is always little brother getting our choice candidates getting plucked out, and we always are so frustrated. But I'll say this, an underrated state for us this past cycle was California. We returned all of our incumbents, folks in tough districts, especially Orange County. We actually flipped a seat in Northern California. New York got a lot of ink.
Democrats think their path back to the majority is simply New York and California.
Yeah, I mean, well, I hope that they're pretty blue states, but look, it's going to be a friggin' mess, and I'm going to love every minute of it on the Senate side. It's going to be fun. But Katie Porter's seat, we could win. We could win that.
You almost won it this last time. Yep. But it's going to be, there's going to be some huge names in here, and it'll be interesting to watch the progressive movement. Ro Khanna, Katie Porter, they're both, Barbara Lee.
Adam Schiff.
Progressives they love all of those people.
Yeah.
It's going to be fascinating to watch if that becomes, it's inevitably going to get nasty.
And it's going to be expensive. There's also part of Katie Porter's announcement, too. There's some trickiness with timing. I mean, obviously, Dianne Feinstein hasn't announced that she's resigning, but she sure has been there a long time.
Yeah,
well, I was just going to say that would be if she doesn't finish her term, then suddenly Gavin Newsom's, and he has said he's going to pick a black woman because, you know, he hasn't. So most people assume that's Barbara Lee.
Barbara Lee, she would be my first candidate that he would pick. And then if she's the incumbent, you know,
that's a different,
that's a different dynamic.
77-year-old freshman senator.
These seats don't open up.
No, I get it. If I were them, I'd do it.
The point again.
77 is the new 52.
If you're Feinstein, you're just going to get 12 years out of it.
Hey, California ambitious people, it's now or 2042, okay? Or the 2044 presidential. All right. Meredith, Eugene, Matt, thank you for humoring me on that. For more analysis on the early political moves, setting the stage for 2023, 2024, and beyond, check out my latest episode of the Chuck Todd Cast. Josh Kroshauer and Leanne Caldwell are among my guests. After the break, governing in the minority with an eye on winning back the majority. I'm going to talk to the new House Democratic Campaign Committee Chair, Congresswoman Susan DelBene. That's next. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. As we mentioned, lawmakers in the House are currently voting on a pair of what are best called anti-abortion access messaging bills this hour. Republicans brought the bills to the floor, despite abortion being a top issue that rallied voters against them, at least voters in the middle in the 2022 midterm elections. And it comes as House Democrats are navigating their new minority status under new leadership that is hoping to retake the chamber when voters head to the polls in 2024. It has been I think at least since the 1950s, when voters essentially changed control of the House in literally only a 2-year cycle. I'm joined now by one of the Democratic Party's newest leaders, Congresswoman Susan DelBene of Washington State. She was recently named chair of the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, and I know it's something that she's been thinking about a while. Congresswoman, it's good to see you. Happy New Year.
Good to see you, too. Happy New Year.
So let me start with, when do you think your job is to win the majority? And I say this because in our previous segment, we talked about George Santos. A resignation could trigger a special election. I always say a 5-seat House majority is like a 1-seat Senate majority. So if you could win the majority before November of 2024, would you try to do it?
Hey, we're working hard right now. We're going to be ready for special elections that come up and make sure we're in a strong position as we go through this cycle. But absolutely, as you said, we only need 5 seats to take back the majority. And we have 18 seats that Republicans are in across the country that Biden won in 2020. So there's a lot of places where we will be working hard, recruiting great candidates across the country. We're putting together a great team, getting our message out. We're in a strong position.
I want you to talk about the tension. You mentioned the 18 Republicans that are sitting in districts that Joe Biden carried in 2020. Many of them are very moderate, not all of them, but many of them are. And they may want to work with Democrats on some issues. At the same time, as a political effort, you guys want to target them for defeat in 2024. How do you navigate that? How does it end up you don't end up working with these folks as much as you might because of the campaign aspect?
Well, let's be clear. Look what we saw just last week. We saw dysfunction and chaos in the election of a speaker, and that was the way that Republicans are governing across the board. Dysfunction electing a speaker, but they were united in enabling extremism and continuing to support extremism. We need, and I think people across the country want to see governance work. They want to see people come to the table, make sure that we are advancing policies. Actually, a lot of policies that we got through the last Congress, a very productive Congress. But you know, we already saw between the vote for the speaker and the chaos there, the rules package they put in place, the attacks on reproductive rights right now, that is the Republican Party. And that's not representative of the communities that we serve and what they want to see happen out here in D.C.
Is there, I just had Congressman Ken Buck on, a Republican from Colorado. and he's very into antitrust legislation in the tech world. Is that among the only issues that realistically could actually get bipartisan interest and attention in? Is that one of the few areas? Where do you expect actual bipartisan cooperation, issue-wise, in this Congress?
Well, I think there are always opportunities if Republicans decide and this side to lead and put forward those opportunities. Make sure that committees are working in a bipartisan fashion. We see the Rules Committee with members of the Freedom Caucus on the Rules Committee. Are they going to move and put forward bills that are bipartisan? I think that's a question, and I'm very concerned about Republican leadership's willingness to do that. We are here to govern, to put together policies that help families, communities, workers across the country. And so that's why we came here. That's the work we're going to do. But it's very concerning seeing what we're already seeing from Republican leadership. Your predecessor, Sean Patrick Maloney, a lot of arrows were tossed at him, even from members of your side of the aisle, in how he managed the DCCC, decisions that were made. What are some things you want to change in how the DCCC worked from last cycle to this cycle? Well, let's be clear. We exceeded expectations, are in a very, very strong position coming into this Congress. No one expected us to do as well as we did. As you said, we are only 5 seats away from having the majority. We are in a very strong position, and Democrats are united. You saw that on the floor. We have strong new leadership, and I think everyone saw that with a speech from our leader, Hakeem Jeffries. So we are in a strong position. We are working hard and going to work hard to make sure that we take back those gavels in 2024. I want to ask you about the disclosure that President Biden had classified documents in his private offices, and that we knew about this before the election, but it wasn't made public until earlier this week. Was that a mistake? Well, I think it's really important, and we've heard that folks are cooperating, have proactively worked with authorities to deliver the documents back. So this is very important that they have been doing that, and I think is in stark contrast to what we saw with President Trump. But this is obviously a very important situation, and I think it's important that the president and his team have been cooperating. And finally, we were talking about the flood of Democratic House members that want to run for Senate in California, the flood of Democratic House members that want to run for the Senate in Michigan. I imagine you'd like to see some of those folks run for re-election and not leave and maybe lose a primary. What's your case to some of them? Are you going to try to talk some of them out of it? Well, I think every cycle we see some folks who seek other office or retire. So we are going to continue to make sure we recruit great candidates. We have a strong bench across the board. We'd love to see great members stay, but I also know that there are opportunities out there for them to continue to make a difference. And we will be in a strong position to make sure that we keep those districts Democratic districts. So you're not sharing polling that tries to convince these folks not to run statewide? We want to make sure we're going to let those folks make the decisions they're going to make, and we're going to be in a strong position to keep those seats. Congresswoman Susan DelBene, Democrat from Washington State, appreciate you coming on. The new chair of the DCCC, I'm sure, will be speaking quite a bit over the next 2 years. Thanks. Let me turn now to California, not for politics, but where a series of dangerous storms continue to hit the state. Millions of homes and businesses are still under flood alerts. There are more than 50,000 customers without power right now after weeks of storms. Today, 31 of California's 58 counties are technically under a federal emergency declaration, which of course makes way for funds to deal with the destruction from floodwaters, wind, mudslides. It just erases red tape, but it tells you the totality of this destruction that we're seeing here. At least 17 storm-related deaths have been reported since last month. Meantime, authorities in the San Luis Obispo area continue to search for a 5-year-old boy who was swept away Monday when floodwaters overtook the car he was traveling in with his mother. Officials are urging residents to stay off roads. In fact, many major roadways continue to face closures across the state. So if you're living out there, check with local authorities, see what's open, see what's not. This is video now of the Sierra highways outside of Sacramento, which shut down because of record-setting snow and ice. Forecasters say this atmospheric river is expected to bring even more severe weather into next week. We know Friday is going to be a rough day for sure. Still to come, everything we know about the massive outage that forced federal authorities to ground
all air travel nationwide this morning and what it says about the vulnerability of this vital piece of U.S. infrastructure. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. Air traffic is slowly resuming after the FAA lifted a nationwide ground stop this morning that caused widespread delays. The agency halted all domestic departures as it worked to restore an outage of the Notice to Air Missions System, NOTAM, it's short for, which in part provides key safety information to pilots. Now, it's unclear what caused the unprecedented outage. The FAA and the Secretary of Transportation, Pete Buttigieg, both say they will look into the cause of the system failure, and nothing has been ruled out, including nefarious action, but they have no evidence to indicate that it was nefarious either. Joining me now is a former FAA administrator, Randy Babbitt. Mr. Babbitt, I appreciate you coming on, adding some expertise here. So, look, this system, how often in your understanding and experience, how often does this system go down?
Well, this is the first in my experience. The system, it's been around a long time, and it's critically important. A lot of facts about the flight that need to be transmitted to the pilots is how it's shared through that system. And honestly, I've never heard of it failing before.
Is it a system that one would call antiquated if they looked at it through the prism of 21st century technology, or has it been a system that has been updated and modernized as technology has improved?
No, I would suggest it's a system that's been around a long time, and the reality of the other side of it, it's not a system. It's not just like buying a new computer. This has thousands of points of entry. Remember, every airport reports into it, and it transmits this information to every airline, every pilot, civil, general aviation, military. All of them are aware of any inconsistencies or safety issues in the system, go through that system. So it's not an easy one to change, but it is dated.
Look, I ask this because, for years I keep hearing that whether it's our air traffic control system, is something that needs to be upgraded and improved, and that, frankly, we could probably increase the amount of air travel we have domestically if we had a better air traffic control system. What's been the biggest impediment there?
Well, I think, in a word, money.
Yeah, of course.
In the past, I testified enough times for FAA reauthorizations, but I think every now and then we get, penny wise and pound foolish. When you think of the money that was lost, when you have an incident like this, what it costs the airlines, what it costs the traveling public, the meetings that got missed, the vacations, all of these things add up to a tremendous loss. And in retrospect, a lot of people would say, well, we would have done far better to have spent a little more money on the system and have a better system, provided and avoid these kinds of issues in the future.
This is not, they haven't ruled out any sort of nefarious action, but there doesn't appear to be any evidence that says it was nefarious. But let me ask you this, how vulnerable would this system be to bad actors?
Well, all of the systems in the FAA are pretty tight systems. I'll say they do invest a great deal there, because you see the trauma that could be developed if someone could get in and mess with the system. I mean, you could have mechanical, the hardware failures, software failures. I guess it's somewhat concerning the fact that the backup systems failed to kick in. And so I know they're not ruling anything out, but that would probably be low on my list of things to, be concerned about.
Bottom line, is this something that, as a former FAA administrator, you're like, we've been saying the infrastructure in our system is outdated and old, and something like this was inevitable? Or is this such an unusual situation that you can't really chalk it up to that?
Well, there's a little bit of the former. There's very little solace in "I told you so." So,
yeah.
But the fact is, they've been keeping some of these systems alive, antiquated as they are. The teams that work on them, to their credit, keep them going. But as more and more time goes on, I mean, the modern software of today is so much more advanced, and we can certainly do a whole lot better with a better system.
We know the technology is out there. We just have to have the will and, as you say, the resources to make it happen. Randy Babbitt, former FAA administrator. Thanks for bringing your expertise to this story for us. Appreciate it.
Well, thanks so much for having me. I enjoyed it. Thank you.
And thank you all for being with us this hour. I told you we had a pretty busy day today. I'll be back tomorrow with more Meet the Press Now. My friend Hallie Jackson picks up News Now coverage right now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.